when Kaguya and Norman are from vastly different series. Kaguya living a normal life trying to find love while Norman lives a seemingly normal life just for it to be stripped away from him in an instant. Which one of these characters lived smarter? Let's find out. First is spatial, and this seems really close, but Norman seems to edge it out slightly. Both characters observe spatial features in the amount of space and the materials in them, but Norman seems to do so more strategically as to avoid suspicion and use it to greater planning, connecting both things to form a plan. Norman gets these with hard difficulty, giving him the total points of 25 points and Kaguya with a 0. Next is intrapersonal, and the first category is understanding your own intentions. This seems to lean towards Kaguya, who has a full grasp of what she intends to do, setting out to achieve it however she feels necessary, where Norman seems to second-guess himself at times before coming to a certain conclusion. Kaguya takes this with hard difficulty. Next is understanding what you will do. This seems to favor Norman this time, who has a better grasp of what he's planning and how it will affect certain things, where Kaguya might think up something but realizes it doesn't work exactly how she intended it to. Norman takes this with medium difficulty. Next is understanding your limitations. This favors Norman, as typically Kaguya thinks highly of herself and therefore overlooks a lot of her restrictions instead of accepting them, even getting frustrated when she realizes she's overlooked something, where Norman considers his limitations into his planning, noting things such as how his mother has a tracker that can find any of the children at any time. Norman takes this with medium difficulty. Next is understanding your knowledge. For similar reasons, Norman takes this one, keeping track of things he knows and doesn't know, taking into account that others might know things he doesn't, and thus relies on others' knowledge as well as his own, where Kaguya does have a lot of knowledge. She tends to overlook some of it for things she rather do instead. Norman takes this with medium difficulty. Next is adaptability. This fairly goes to Norman, who quickly thinks up on planning an escape from the orphanage once presented with a reason to escape and when new information or circumstances come about. He thinks of ways to get around it, while Kaguya typically loses her train of thought or her plan goes wrong when it derails, and thus she has no way to think of how to get out of the predicament she then finds herself in. Norman takes this with easy difficulty. Last is emotional control. Norman takes this with easy difficulty, as he almost never loses his cool, while Kaguya gets easily frustrated when presented with something that hinders her abilities or makes her plans go wrong. Norman won more points, gaining the total points of 29 points and Kaguya with 2 points. Next is linguistic, and this surprisingly goes to Kaguya, who takes all these categories with medium difficulty. Kaguya picks her words wisely, deciding upon the topic of conversation and where to lead. Kaguya knows just what to say to lead someone into a trap and force their hand verbally, while Norman has said things at times that have made people lack trust in him. Kaguya gets the overall points, giving her 22 points and Norman with a 0. Next is bodily kinesthetics, and this is close but seems to lean in Kaguya's favor, who practices sports, which includes archery, showing that she has a very good hand-eye coordination. Kaguya takes upper body control and reflexes with medium difficulty, but Norman seems to take lower body control for his abilities in tag, outrunning and outmaneuvering a fully grown adult. Norman takes this with medium difficulty. Kaguya got more points, giving her the total points of 14 points and Norman with 4. Next is interpersonal, and the first category is understanding others' intentions. This is close, but it seems to favor Norman, as Kaguya at first appears to realize that Miyuki limes her but then doesn't understand why he won't confess to her. So she has a lot of conflicting ideas about what others' intentions are, while Norman doesn't realize his mother's intentions at first. Once the truth is revealed, he knows what to expect from her. Norman takes this with hard difficulty. Next is understanding what others will do. This is close, but it seems to favor Kaguya, as she predicts a lot of what Miyuki will do and thinks up ways to counter them before the interaction even happens, while Norman thinks he knows what will happen most of the time, only for someone to end up doing something differently. Norman did predict Rei attempting suicide, but Kaguya seems to be more consistent in realizing what others will do. Kaguya takes this with hard difficulty. Next is understanding others' limitations. This is close, but it seems to favor Norman, since he knew exactly how the orphanage operated and when their schedule was, and used this to work within and come up with a plan for escaping, while Kaguya can consider others' limitations. She can sometimes overlook them. Norman takes this with hard difficulty. Last is understanding others' knowledge. This is close as well, but it seems to favor Norman, who used what others knew against them, such as allowing Rei to walk freely around even when Norman knew he was a traitor, knowing what Rei's reasonings were. Norman takes this with hard difficulty. Norman got more points, so he gets the total points of 22 points and Kaguya with 6 points. Next is existential, and Norman takes this as Kaguya isn't really shown having any existential thoughts, while Norman strongly believes in family and his friends, taking this with medium difficulty, giving him the total points of 12 points and Kaguya with a 0. Next is logical, and this seems to favor Norman, who is able to gather all the correct information on his orphanage, knowing how to get it and who to get it from. Norman deduces the information accurately, telling exactly how things work in the orphanage and what to make of it, which allows him to plan a strategy of escape. Norman takes these with medium difficulty, giving him the total points of 34 points and Kaguya with a 0. Next is musical, and this goes to Norman as he has heightened hearing from playing tag in the woods with his siblings, knowing where and who's after him and where they're coming from, or the opposite, in searching for them. Norman takes this with medium difficulty, giving him the total points of 20 points and Kaguya with a 0. The last section is naturalist, and these seem to all go to Norman as well, who learns well and gets perfect scores in his class, also learning from Norman on how his technology works. Norman also has a firm understanding on how people act in certain situations, knowing that he could trust his siblings with the plan he set out for them. Norman takes these with medium difficulty, giving him the total points of 26 points and Kaguya with a 0. This was a really interesting comparison to see, more so than I thought it'd be. Norman was able to gain 172 and Kaguya with 44. There might have been this big gap in points, but it was actually fairly close in half the categories, only being taken by Norman by a slight edge. It was interesting to see two somewhat similar characters from different series be compared, but Norman won, so he'll be moving on to the next round. What did you think of this video? Do you agree with the results? Let me know what you think in the comments.